Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the WorldPac World Professional Automotive Community Live. My name is Scott Brown and I'm introducing our speaker tonight. First of all, I am a technician and a shop owner. My wife and I own and operate Connie and Dick's Service Center in Claremont, California, and we are in our 60th year of operation. I've been at this shop since 1989, and we're in a challenging industry. So I'm really happy to be able to present or bring Carolyn or introduce Carolyn to talk about a very important topic. It's one that I am a big proponent over. We're dealing with customers and how they perceive our work and our value is always a big challenge. So she's a really sharp individual. I've known Carolyn probably for over 20 years now. I think I met her back at a IETN conference back in Anaheim. So in addition to my shop technician status, I've also got a company that I started 2 years ago called Diagnostic Network, diag.net. And it's all about diagnostics, professionalism, and what have you. And I welcome you to check that out. Prior to that, was with IETN for about 22 years, and I'm a big advocate of the automotive service industry. So tonight's class, it is a business management class, and it is presented by Carolyn Coquilette. She is I'm just going to read a couple of bullets here. She's a professional hybrid technician since 2001. She's a founder and owner of Luscious Garage in San Francisco, California. Beautiful shop. I've visited there myself, and I've seen what she's got going on there. It's awesome. It is a Green Small Business Award winner and certified benefit corporation, meeting high standards and social sustainability, environmental performance, accountability, and public transparency. She was the Women in Auto Care's 2017 Female Shop Owner of the Year. And as she is the founder and CEO of Shop-Ware shop management system software, I can tell you that we're using that product also in our shop, and it is something that really helps us communicate in the modern day with with our customers and the rest of the industry. So I've got some interesting stories. Perhaps Carolyn might get into that later. So tonight's presentation is packed with terrific information, documenting and selling your work to the importance of customer perspective. Carolyn's presentation can help you increase your average tickets, and generate 5-star reviews. And I know that for sure. That is something that I've witnessed myself. So pay close attention, take lots of notes. Please ask questions as Carolyn moves through the presentation. And she'll try to get to as many of those questions as she can at the end of the presentation. So let's get started. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you, Scott. It's an honor to have you introducing me. Also, my thanks to the WorldPac team for the invitation to be with you here. CTI and WTI put on the best training in the business, and it's an honor to be a part of this. As we were thinking about this presentation, our goal was to provide value across stakeholders. So we were thinking what would be relevant to technicians and managers and shop owners and potentially vendors. So hoping to break through the typical structure where it's either management or technical tonight and have a little bit for everybody. Regardless of where you are in this industry, I want you to know that you make a difference. If you look at the variety and the caliber of participants on this webinar series alone, it's pretty remarkable. And we have a very bright future as an industry, which I'll touch on tonight. I hope you enjoy this presentation. A little more about me. So I come from the service bay. I started at a service station where there was no service advisor. The rest was up to me and my buddy Dave. We were the two techs on duty. I have always cherished being able to represent my own work to the customer. And I took that with me when I opened my own repair shop, with the goal of finding ways to optimize the connection and buy-in with customers. My specialty is hybrids, and that was part of the motivation, that they're more technically savvy but also because that was just what my customers were craving. And we'll talk some more about this too. After ramping up my shop, I started a shop management company, which is all about improving and maximizing communication with customers. It's my passion to bridge the divide between high-tech cars and the people that depend on them. That might seem silly, but I think that this is a foundational component of how we live today, how we appreciate service professionals, how we take responsibility for our impact as consumers, and how we stay grounded as a society on reality. My heart is obviously in the automotive aftermarket. We're an amazing community that keeps the world moving, and we deserve respect and reward. Our biggest obstacle is that people just don't understand what the hell they're paying us for. People don't get it. And that's ironic because we're trying to help them. We're here to help them. And oftentimes we are misconstrued as part of the problem, not part of the solution. This presentation will help you improve your relationship with your customers so you can be appreciated personally and financially. Tonight's session is called Showcasing Your Shop's Technical Expertise. And that's because technical expertise is everything. If you think about why people patronize your business, they do so because you fix their car at an affordable price and you treat them with respect. People often ask me, oh, your shop is woman-owned, it's beautiful, it's environmentally conscious. That must be part of your competitive advantage. And I always point out that none of that matters if we can't fix the car at an affordable price and treat customers with respect. I'll talk about all three of these things, but our primary focus is going to be number one, fixing the car. And that's because fixing the car is number one. All of these things are important, but in order of priority, fixing the car comes first, period. If you can't fix the car, the price and how you treated the customer will not matter. If you can fix the car, but the customer can't afford the price, they'll go somewhere that presumably can fix the car at a lower price or one that's more affordable to them. And that, of course, is debatable and gets us back into number one and what we're going to talk about in this presentation, which is how you present the technical mandate for what you're recommending. And finally, if you fix the car at a reasonable price, but you still treat the customer badly, they'll go back and try and find someone who will do all three of these things. But any way you slice it, you have to fix a car. Not only that, fixing a car is what we sell. Fixing a car is our product, our auto repair product. And I point that out because we oftentimes forget that this is what we're selling. It's also what we're the best at. It's our strength. It's why we got into the business. And also it's what the customers need, right? The customers don't know how to fix their own car. If they could fix their own car, they'd do it themselves. So fixing the car is everything. My goal is going to teach you how to improve how you communicate, specifically how you show the customer that you fixed their car. That might seem trivial, but when we think about all three of these things, I feel like this aspect is the one piece that we could use the most improvement on. There's a lot of focus on how you're pricing or how you're treating your customers or marketing, but talking to your customer about how you fix their car, that's an area where we have a lot of room to improve. The good news is that there is room to improve because right now we're under a lot of pressure and we need some help. If you look at the trends in vehicles these days, obviously everyone in this industry knows how complicated contemporary cars are, and they're not getting any less complicated anytime soon. And then we have the consumer on the flip side who has really no concept of how the car works, and that's by design, right? It says check engine, but it doesn't mean check engine. And meanwhile, their own experience as a consumer is to get, whatever they want through their phones. They're very enabled. They want it to be super accessible, quick response time, personalization. Their expectations for how they're going to be treated are extraordinarily high right now. And then, of course, when something goes wrong with their car, which is an unwelcome event, we're left to reconcile. We're the reckoners. We're the ones that have to basically bring these two parties together. We have to satisfy them both. And when you look at how we're running our businesses, we're actually running our businesses that in a way that doesn't really serve either one terrifically well. I mean, we are serving the car, but we're not doing a very good job showcasing what we're doing to the car to the customer. And we see here an example. This is obviously an example of someone at the counter. It feels impersonal. It feels not terribly sophisticated and different from what the customer is experiencing otherwise. There's also the other aspects of what we do when the customer's not standing in the business. And I want to talk about those first. So we are at an adapt or die moment in our businesses right now. We need to change. And that's because we're under a lot of pressure. We're under pressure from all sides, right? We have the things that I'm just talking about here in terms of trends, but also we acknowledge there is such a challenge to be technically capable these days. Maintaining the tools, finding the technicians to be in your business, and then keeping them trained. We all know the challenges of those things. Also, there's increased competition for customer trust, right? It's not just other shops. We've always had other shops competing for our customers, but now we have the internet to tell them one thing or the other. We also have the resurgence or insurgence of concierge services. So if the experience for the customer is unwelcome, they can just use a different service to accomplish getting their car fixed. And that's a really significant erosion to our profitability, right? We give up the additional profits in our service center, our profit centers to these other services that bring those customers to us. And then all the technicians out there, you are under extreme pressure to learn all the different tools, to master the service information. There's different scanners, different websites. You also have digital vehicle inspections, other shop processes that you have to learn how to use. And as a professional, you're paid based on what you do, not what you know. And that's unlike other professions. And because it's no longer obvious what you did on the car, you need to become a great communicator and a great record taker. And so that's true of the technicians that are working in the shop, and it's true for the shop themselves. The one thing I want to note before we leave this slide is that technicians are the one piece of the equation with, again, high-tech cars and consumers. Techs are the one piece of this equation that is essential as we go forward. Auto repair is not going anywhere. And so if you want to stay and compete, there is real money to be made. Self-driving cars will not be self-fixing cars. And when we talk about showcasing our technical expertise, what we mean is we're selling our technical expertise. And the better we sell ourselves, the better our livelihoods are going to be. So how have we communicated historically? So obviously there's been repair orders since the dawn of time, paper-based handwritten repair orders, and now often from shop management software. We're also very familiar with conducting business over the phone. More recently, we have employed digital vehicle inspections and texting. And I'm going to talk about all of these because all four of them have their limitations. Okay, repair orders. Repair orders are inherently challenged because they have to tell the whole story. There's a saying, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. I've heard Scott say, if there was nobody left on earth but the judge and the customer and the repair order, would the repair order appropriately defend what you did in your repair shop? So the repair order is essential, and it has the burden of hindsight. The repair order is also challenged because it has to keep track of parallel activities on the car. So the kind of simplified example of like a car comes in on the hook and it doesn't start and it needs a starter, and you put the starter in it and now it starts and the car leaves. That never happens anymore. That's the exception to the rule. That's a simple thing to try and articulate in a repair order. Nowadays, you'll have a customer coming in for an oil change or a maintenance service, and then they'll have a handful of things that they want you to look at that will require potentially a diagnosis. And then coming out of both the maintenance service and potentially the diagnosis, you're going to have a handful of repairs. So now you have information that has to kind of relate to all of these different activities. And it's very hard for you to put all of that in a succinct way onto the repair order. There is this time-honored service writing concept of concern, cause, and correction, CCC. And the problem with CCC is that CCC is a legacy, a leftover from when we would handwrite repair orders. So you would ask the customer what's going on, and then you would write what they said down onto the repair order. And then whatever you found, you would add to that piece of paper that you hand wrote. And it didn't matter whether those two activities of both selling the job and what the customer said were intermixed, because you were going to have to rewrite it anyway. Also, cars were a lot less sophisticated when we were handwriting tickets. That's not the case anymore, and we're not doing ourselves a very good service by mixing customer states alongside what we're asking the customer to pay for, and I'm gonna highlight that as part of this presentation for sure. There's also limitations with legacy shop management systems forcing you to put back of house notes on the ticket. That's also bad. And in both cases, you're essentially burdening your counter staff with having to clean this stuff up to compensate for the fact that the repair does not have its own natural clarity. Limitations of phone calls. So talking on the phone is what's called a synchronous activity. You both have to be there at the same time. I like to think of the customer's attention span as like a recording tape that's only 30 seconds long. And so if you get the customer on the phone and you start talking to them, you've got 30 seconds to communicate whatever it is you're going to communicate. Otherwise, if it goes longer, you've just overwritten whatever you started with. And so when you're talking about simple things like, hey, you need a starter, and maybe what's the quality of that starter, and when will the car be ready, and what's the price, that's pretty easy to fit into 30 seconds. But when you get back to a contemporary context where we're talking about maintenance and diagnosis and then multiple repairs, it's very, very challenging to get that across to the customer so that they can comprehend everything you're saying. It also doesn't give the customer the time and space to gain understanding about what you're saying. I've heard some people say, never call the customer at the end of the day because they're going to say, oh, wait, let me think about it and call you back. I think that's ridiculous. You definitely want to get your customers understanding and buy-in when they say yes. There's some concern, oh, they're going to go and price shop me. Well, if they don't price shop you at the moment that you're talking to them, making the sale over the phone, they're going to go and look up the price later. And I'd much rather have that discussion now before they agree to the price instead of after. So there's no misunderstanding. That space on the phone is just not great for giving them the chance to kind of make their own decision. They're under pressure. And in so doing, they often make decisions based on, like, you know, do I like this guy? There's a lot of emphasis in management training around phone skills. So now suddenly what the car needs, what's best for the car, is being determined by the personability of your counter staff, which is not related. There's no relationship. It also has no relationship to the quality of your technicians that are in the back. So that's problematic. Or the customer starts thinking in terms of dollars and budgets. Again, they're thinking, okay, what are they saying? I'm quickly adding it up, and then I'm making a decision on what I'm going to do based on how much money I have. Again, that has no relationship to what the car actually needs and what's in the best interest for them, like overall. So giving them a space to really think about what you're saying, independent of a phone call, is really important. And then, of course, last but not least, the hardest thing about the phone is that the customer has to answer it, and very few people do nowadays. We're busy leaving voicemail. And when I talk to prospects who are considering a switch to a different shop management system, you know, you're just listening to the phone ring and ring and ring and ring and ring, and it's just choking your repair shop. A ton of lost efficiency dealing with phone calls. So when we look forward, we go, okay, now we have DVIs, we have some other tools to help get more digital content in front of the customer, especially photos. And DVIs are not perfect either. DVIs are traditionally performed in parallel to the customer's concerns. So you've got, you know, what you put on the repair order as far as what the customer needs, and then you have this independent document that's capturing the inspection. They're typically one size fits all, and they're performed at the intake. So it's something that you do as a standard procedure at the beginning of the car getting dropped off, or when the technician first gets their hands on it. And as a result, it's only capturing sort of the initial inspection. It's not capturing what you did and what you ultimately sold and repaired on the car. So it's not showing the customer how you fixed their car. It's showcasing how you'd like to fix the car. But how you actually fix the car isn't contained, and that's very important. Also, texting. We love texting because customers respond right away, and that's great. But the reason why they respond so quickly is because it's a very simple way for them to communicate. And if you're talking about high dollar repairs, if you're going to sell, a high dollar ARO with a bunch of different services recommended, it's very hard to get that across in a text message. You can certainly summarize it and say, hey, you need $3,000 worth of work, but that's not a real high value pitch to the customer about why they should buy your services. Again, it's disconnected. It's a parallel process where you're having a conversation here that's independent of a conversation on the ticket, and then you're left having to kind of go back and recopy the substance of the text messages into your ticket to know what the customer said. You can always text somebody, hey, please call the shop, but when you do that, now you're back to dealing with the limitations of the phone call. So those are still in play, even if you text the person initially. It's interesting to note that prior to texting, we used email, and email is basically obsolete now. No one really, does communication about auto repair through email. But what's interesting is that at least on email, you can organize a bunch of detail and provide value to the customer. The problem is it takes a lot of time to put it there. So here's what you're going to do. This is the emphasis of this presentation. This is what you need to take away from this presentation. So it's very simple. I will go into each one of these three things, but this is basically it. This is the magic from going from where you might be today to being able to meet your customers where they are and better promote yourself as a professional and your technical expertise. The first is you're going to rethink how you're service writing. So we're going to adapt our traditional way of thinking about concern, cause, and correction, and we're going to bring customer states out of the 20th century. We're also going to clarify your labor operations. So the emphasis here is on clarity. You're going to get smarter about how you capture service details to present to the customer. You're going to showcase what matters, add value, and provide that reference for perpetuity. Length should not be your primary concern as long as you're clear. So as long as what you're talking about is pertinent to what the customer needs to know, you should include it. And that's sort of the balance between technical expertise, i.e. what you're selling, and overwhelming them, intimidating them, making them not want to listen. Last but not least, you're going to emphasize digital content. And I know some of you are thinking, I already do this. I already have a DVI. I'm already texting. I'm doing things digitally. The key component is that you need to do this before, during, and after the repair. It needs to surround the activities that occurred on the vehicle. If you've got a favorite DVI tool or a capable shop management system that can do this, that's great. If not, you need to find one. And until then, you need to solve this problem for yourself with like online storage, like Google Drive and a shop camera or something. So you don't have to do a wholesale change to your business, but you do have to figure out how to get this information in front of your customer. And so what we're going to talk about is not just how you can capture the information, but how you can share that information with the customer. So we're talking about digital media and the conversation being digital also. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Doing these three things will make your shop look more sophisticated, knowledgeable, and organized. It will reinforce your competency and your care to the customer. So all of these things are going to deeply enhance the value that you're presenting to the customer. And it's also going to shift the emphasis off of you, the shop, as kind of like the messenger here. And it will move the customer's focus onto what's actually the problem, which is the car. Okay, so rethinking CCC. You are going to stop putting customer states as part of the service that you are charging for. You're going to stop using codes or jargon in how you describe your services, and you're going to stop including back of house notes on the repair order. Here's an example of a service that is doing two of these things. So here's a service that is presumably called MWL, as presented to the customer. We, of course, know what MWL stands for, but the customer doesn't. And then inside of the service, we have now added, we see some customer states notes. So very traditional. Customer states master warning, customer states MWL on. Pulled codes found P0171, tested oxygen sensor found bad, replaced oxygen sensor, cleared codes. And this thing is costing the customer $855. So $855 for MWL. I'll get back to this in a second. Here's an example of back of house notes leaking onto the repair order. So we've got service request drop off, exclamation point, and then a bunch of just like translated customer states, check and advise, check brakes, customer off, drop off again, exclamation point. And this is, of course, the service advisor using the notes that are being presented to the customer to help keep track of their own internal operations around, is it a drop off? Is it a loaner? Is it a what? That's not the customer's problem. That's not the customer's concern. It's distracting the customer from what you are charging for. You're not charging them for a drop off. What you're going to do instead is you're going to start putting customer states in one separate place in plain English. Now, that might sound crazy because you've been doing it differently for decades. But when you think about it, what you do when you do this is you're actually presenting untampered factual information. So what did the customer actually state? You're not interpreting at all. You just write what the customer stated in that one box. This allows you to skip having to figure out which concerns go in which bucket. You don't have to therefore think about what the technician ultimately found, where that goes under the customer concern to put it somewhere. None of that has to happen anymore. And there's therefore also no redundancy. So if for whatever reason the customer has multiple concerns and they all have the same cause, you're not having to repeat that you replace the oxygen sensor 3 times, for example. And that's important because as you're presenting this as what you're charging the customer for, they can think, well, did I have to pay 3 times for something? Of course they didn't. In all of these cases, this makes sense to the customer. The customer understands this. This is what they stated. So it's a lot more intuitive. And depending on what your system is, I don't really care where you figure out where to put the customer states. So if you've got a system right now that you're using that works this way, you got to stop, you got to pull it out, you got to find somewhere else to put that and just get it out of your services. In addition to that, you are going to start presenting the services that you do sell individually and for each type of service that you're selling. So you've got maintenance services, you've got diagnostics or testing, and you've got repairs. And each one of those things needs to have its own service, and what is included in that thing needs to be called out. Itemizing what these services include is important in all cases. So you should itemize things when you're diagnosing. You should itemize things during maintenance. Just don't throw like an LOF up there and it doesn't have any detail about what that includes. Same thing with your repairs, and I'll give you another example. And when you're thinking about, okay, well, what do I pull out? How do I present this? You can think about it in terms of what are the things that you're charging time for? Because presumably, if it takes time and you're therefore charging the customer for it, then they should appreciate that this took time and they can see that, okay, this thing happened. What is the customer paying you to do? So if they're requesting you to do something, that's what you should be calling out. What is the technician spending time doing? So anything that's incurring technician time, that's something that you want to call out. You don't have to go super deep, but I like to think of it, especially when you consider the tasks that could be assigned to different types of technicians. So for example, one person did the alignment and the other person did the 0-point calibration. So you can call those out separately, and it also, presumably, you might need to record different technicians and allocate their build hours differently as well. This is a redux of the previous service that I showed you with the oxygen sensor. So instead of saying MWL, instead the first service is called warning light on, first hour of testing. I like to gander, and it varies depending on your shop management systems, but the reason why you put MWL or LOF into the title of your service is because you have to memorize those codes to be able to extract them and add them to the ticket. And again, if that's how your shop management system is working, that's not your customer's problem. So don't let whatever limitations in your own internal processes end up leaking into what you're presenting to the customer and lowering your value. What you want to show to the customer is a, unabbreviated version of what it is they are being charged for. In this case, it can still be warning light on, and that they're paying for the first hour of testing. Some people like diagnosis, some people like testing. I use testing as an example here. And then inside of this service, we see all of the things that are going to be included as part of this first hour of testing. Secondly, we have a second service. So the first service was the diagnosis. The second service is the repair. And in this case, the service is called remove and replace oxygen sensor. This is showing itemized subtotals for labor parts, hazmat, and fees. Some states don't require you to do that, and you can just have a menu price. It really doesn't matter. In either case, it's a high dollar repair. It's $855. And so why is it so high, right? So we've got a high quality part, and we also want to call out the different aspects of the service that took that amount of time. If you look at the labor in this case, this is probably 3 hours or so, depending on what the labor rate is for the shop. What did you spend 3 hours doing? Not just R&Ring the oxygen sensor, right? So comparing these two to each other, think about, what is the customer thinking? What did I pay for? On the left-hand side, I'm paying for the fact that I reported that a warning light was on. So in a way, I'm almost getting punished for having said that the warning light was on, and that warning light cost me $855. Of course, it wasn't the warning light that cost the customer $855, right? It was the fact that they had a faulty oxygen sensor. So what did I pay for on the left-hand side? Questionable. Over here on the right-hand side, it's obvious what the customer is being asked to pay for. They're paying for, as I mentioned, the diagnosis and then the repair. And also, by nature of putting the diagnosis on there, it's going to help your advisors remember, hey, I should be charging for this time. And in this case, we get an extra $150. So this has to do with the CCC and having to kind of rewire how you're putting stuff up in front of your customer. I want to show you some other examples of itemization, not just with this oxygen sensor example, just so you get some additional visibility in how this thing can work. Before I do that, thinking about checklists and inspections. I mentioned, that DVIs have limitations. It's not that I don't like DVIs or I think DVIs are bad. I think DVIs are very, very, very powerful and very important. Checklists are very important. And what's important to realize is that there's actually 3 different kinds of checklists. There is, maintenance or courtesy inspections that you do. Just look over the car. It's like an uncompelled inspection. But there's also checklists that you would perform with a diagnosis and as well with quality control. So you want to have your technician fill things out on purpose to make sure that they did them. With maintenance courtesy, I recommend putting things that are like systems together, like that you would look at together in one line, as opposed to calling them out individually. For example, if I'm a technician and I'm doing a engine compartment inspection, I don't necessarily need to have check belts, check hoses, check radiator, check wiring, blah, blah. And the reason for that is that's not how I work on the car, right? I open the hood and then I look over the whole engine compartment at once, and then I can either determine that something is the matter or there isn't. And if I determine that something is the matter, then I can check it off accordingly and I can write some notes. I think a lot of people, when they think about checklists, have been kind of cart before horse. They've had the technician working for the checklist as opposed to the checklist working for the technician. And that's, I think, in part because people don't trust that technicians are doing a professional job. And you need to remember that you're hiring this person. This person is paid because they know how to fix cars. They don't need to use a checklist to know how to fix a car. And so it's important that you're making the most out of your technician's time. Diagnosis, very similar. The other thing I wanted to call out with quality control is that, first of all, this is often overlooked. This is something that applies to all of the cases of services. So you can have checklists for quality control on maintenance, on diagnosis, as well as on repairs. For people who are disciples of the E-Myth, this is like process, right? Build the checklist, make sure that what you expect to have done is followed. The other thing that's great about this is that when you are including these kinds of checks on the repair order, it's surfacing that attention to detail to the customer and once again, adding value. So here's an example of another service. This isn't an oxygen sensor. This is a hybrid battery pack. I would never put the service title is master warning light on or red triangle on. Never, never, never. We want to make sure that the service that is getting performed is very clear, and that is to replace the hybrid battery pack. And then you see within that the different labor descriptions that are included, again, with the intention of adding value. So we're not just replacing the battery, we are transferring the control electronics, we're cleaning the battery fan, we're load testing the battery. And then we have the part, and then we have the 2 inspection lines. So it doesn't have to be a big checklist, it can be a little one, but it's making sure that the technician's saying yes, the next, the post-repair load test checks correct, and I also cleared the codes, showing that value to the customer. Here's an example of, actually a couple examples of some services from Scott's shop, Connie and Dick's in Claremont. They obviously are probably one of the best diagnostic shops on the surface of the earth. And they've been very focused on ADAS technology and testing. So this is an example of a level 2 electrical performance analysis. So this is what is getting presented to the customer. It has a couple of labor items. You see that it's $190, and then it includes some inspections. So these are the things that Scott has determined are important that he wants to service to his customer. So looking at NHTSA recalls, doing a road test, and then we see that this car has got a code for the radar sensor, and then also a TSB that's related to that. So all that stuff captured in that service and presented as part of what the customer is paying $190 for. This is an actual calibration service. So a radar calibration, you're seeing the different kinds of labor operations that are being called out, that are being done. And it's not a laundry list. It's not 80 points, but it's half a dozen. And all of these things really showcase, what does the radar calibration actually include? Like, okay, you calibrated it, great. Why are you charging me $340? Okay, now I get it. Now I can see why I'm being charged this kind of money. And he also has a checklist that's part of this. You see the beginning of it down here, but this is a continuation. So he's also adding specifics about what he found as part of the calibration as well here. And so not just the labor items conveying the detail and the value of the service, but also what the checklist includes, conveying value to the service. So again, in summary, this is what you're going to do on the 2 top items, which is related to your repair order. You're going to change the way you're presenting customer states, and you're going to clarify what you're actually doing to the car, which is to say selling to the customer, and without being overwhelming. If it's pertinent, if it's something that they should know, include it. The third thing is to emphasize digital content. So folks are real familiar with taking photos as part of inspections. What I want to call out is there's a lot of other times that you can be capturing digital content. And the scenarios are when something is broken, when you have test results, when you're performing a fix, when you're doing a tear down, if you have a great good and bad comparison of something that you found, and the completed fix. So not just, hey, we noticed that you have a trouble code and we recommend you replace your hybrid battery. We want to show, A, why the battery is bad, the test that we ran to confirm that, and I'll show you what that looks like and what we present to the customer. And then I want to take pictures of the car while it's disassembled so the customer can see, okay, here is where the hybrid battery lives and this is what you removed out of my car. Then I take photos of the battery, the new battery and the old battery next to each other, and we present that to the customer, and then we do a final load test that shows the new battery and how it looks good if the same test as the original, so the customer can see that that's changed. And of course, when they pull out of the shop after having done this, they don't feel like, oh, when I pulled in, my red triangle was on, and when I pull out now, the red triangle is off. I hope I needed a hybrid battery. I hope they replaced the hybrid battery. There's no question. They know that they paid that $3,000 because they need it and they received a hybrid battery, not just because the light turned off. Methods for capturing this kind of stuff, obviously, tablets are very common. You can use your phone to take photos. Phones are great because they take great photos. They're small and they're typically already in your technician's back pocket. You can also do screenshots. And if you don't know how to do screenshots, you need to look that up. I'm not going to go into instructions here, but screenshots are an awesome way for you to get free content, whether it's a parts catalog or a TSV or the screenshot of the scan tool or whatever the case may be. So easy way to capture these kinds of images and get them in front of the customer. A couple notes here also about videos. So here's an example or some examples of things that are broken. Again, if something's broken, take a photo of it. Why would you just write it down? If the customer can see that it was broken, then it's not a question of, did they actually diagnose it correctly or did it actually need that thing? They can see that it's broken. Sometimes videos are better than photos, and sometimes it's a scan tool result and not necessarily a hard part. But in either case, capture what is broken. If you're performing tests, you should take photos of the tests. And what's interesting about this is you're already doing this work, right? This doesn't take a lot of extra time to take a photo. What takes a lot of extra time is to do, an injector flow test, right? That takes, a bit. You got to pull all the injectors out, you got to hook them all up, blah, blah, blah. For God's sakes, take a photo and then show that photo to the customer, because then they get to see all of the tools and equipment that you leveraged to fix their car. Comparison photos. So here are some really classic comparison photos. Even if you're doing a maintenance, like they've already agreed to do their air filter, you're not having to sell it to them, absolutely take a photo of the original and the replacement air filter next to each other so they can see that they got that new air filter. Here's some other examples, collision damage, anything that's good and bad. Here's another example of how to do comparisons. So this is referring to technical service bulletin about how to dictate something is bad. Again, the benefit here is you're not saying it one way or the other. You're giving the customer information, and then they can make their own decision based on, in this case, what the manufacturer recommended. Here are photos of something getting fixed. So again, you've sold the work, you've done all the work. This doesn't have to take any extra time beyond someone just taking out their phone and snapping a couple photos. So we've got a hybrid battery replacement, as I mentioned. We've got the inside of somebody's door. Customers don't get to see this stuff. So when you show it to them, they go, oh, wow, now I see all the work that you had to do to replace that door actuator. That's awesome. I'm glad that I paid you an hour in labor to do that. Wiring diagrams, large R&Rs, all that stuff is just great high value stuff that you can share. Here's a before and after of something fixed. So here is the fuel pump flow as recorded before it was fixed and after. This is another great example coming out of Scott's shop that he likes to talk about. This car was misdiagnosed and had a bunch of other stuff already replaced on it. Here's an example of scan data and screenshots. So if you can print a PDF, if you can take a picture or screen grab of a scan tool, or you can take a photo of it, anytime you use a scan tool, you should be collecting some images of what was done, just so the customer can see that you used that scan tool. Same if you're using a special tool. Anytime you employ a special tool, try and capture that so the customer can see, wow, they had a special tool for this. TSVs and recalls, including that stuff for customer reference. And then, as mentioned, parts diagrams, speed dial's got some great ones, online forums also. So as promised, here are some of the examples of the data that we share at my shop. So this is a recording that is done through TechStream anytime we service the engine cooling system on a second generation Prius. So we already warm the engine up and to operating temperature just to bleed it, to make sure that all the air bubbles are out, the thermos is bled, all that stuff. But when we do that, we hook up the scan tool and we record 4 PIDs. Coolant temp, water flow position, what the commanded position is, and then what the outlet temp is at the little thermos in the bumper. And what's cool about this is that this is just recording while the technicians, cleaning their tools or reviewing the next repair order, or whatever the case may be. What this thing captures is a bunch of really valuable data. So first of all, it's capturing the 3-way valve moving through all of its positions. So 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5, which tells me that that valve is moving. I'm also watching the engine reach operating temperature. I see as the valve is moving that the coolant is reaching the thermos, which is great. And then they achieve parity, so it's completely bled. Then I see that the thermostat has opened, and then when the valve has sufficiently, filled the thermos and it's not needing to circulate coolant anymore, it moves the valve to a different position, and then we see the engine warm up and the fan cycle. So I get a full view of this car's health, this cooling system's health, in this graph. And we do this on every single car that gets a cooling service, and that has been helpful not only in terms of then showing the customer, hey, everything worked. Now, we may not necessarily take them through it all. We might just say, hey, we do this graph as part of our routine when we do a cooling service. This says that your fans are working and your 3-way valve is good and everything's kosher. So we don't have to go into this kind of technical detail. I wanted to include this because I felt like there might be some technician nerds that want to check this stuff out. But man, there's a load of data in here. It also helps cover our butts in case something happens down the road. Car left and it was in good operation when it left the building. Here's an example of a failed hybrid battery. So this is a load test pulling the battery state of charge down. And I've moved the cursor out to where the max and the min block lines are at their largest gap. And that those two values are represented in the screenshot. And you can see that the difference between the highest block and the lowest block in the battery is a little less than 600 millivolts, which is unacceptable. And as that's happening, you also start to see the delta state of charge of the battery start to creep up. So this is classic bad hybrid battery. Okay, great. We would show this potentially, via our shared RO to the customer to say, hey, look, we tested your battery. It's bad. You need a new one. Okay, take your word for it. I see lines. I guess I see that 600 millivolts is there. Okay, but this is what we do after the repair. So when the repair is over, we run that same exact test again. We don't have to, right? It's a brand new battery from Toyota. Like, we threw it in there. We're pretty darn sure it's going to work. But we are going to take this same recording anyway because we want to show to the customer, hey, after you spent all this money, you can now see the results. And in this case, the maximum between the two is less than 200 millivolts. This is a good battery. And you can see, the delta state of charge doesn't increase. It stays really close throughout. Regardless of how much the customer knows about hybrid auto repair or how their car works, they can clearly see the change here. And this is where we're talking about how to showcase how you fixed the car. In terms of how you present the information to the customer, so there's what you're presenting, and then there's how you're presenting it, right? So the first thing is obviously to gather the content, which is all this stuff that I just ran by you. In terms of how to put it in front of the customer, you can obviously use a shared repair order if your shop management system facilitates that. You also have the ability to do a kiosk setup. So here is an example of the advisor and the customer sitting together at a desk, and they're sharing a screen. And I'll just show you kind of how that plays out. So you can bring up the repair, the customer can clearly see it. They're asked to, approve the work that's been shown to them. This is something that you can do when you're dropping the car off, but it's also something that you can do when you're going over the repair order before the customer picks up, and you can show them all those photos, the scan results, all that great stuff that you did on the car. Again, the emphasis there is I'm not just being asked to pay my bill because I'm here and I want to get my car. I'm associating what it is I'm paying for at that same moment that I'm paying for it. So I'm seeing all of this detail. I'm seeing it in a very sophisticated way. It reassures the customer that not only did they, get what they were paying for, i.e. they can see that it was done, but also it makes their sense of confidence in your shop and your technical ability is inherent in how you're communicating with them. So they're going to get that warm, fuzzy feeling that these guys did a good job, not just because of what you did, but how you're showing that you did it. Another option is to go with a really, really big screen. I'll show an example of that in a minute. In terms of hardware, you can do an all-in-one computer. All-in-ones are pretty cheap now, and they have touchscreens. You can also use a mini PC with a touchscreen monitor. These are like a Google Chrome box plus a touchscreen monitor. It's pretty cheap nowadays. That and like a keyboard and mouse is like less than $500. So pretty cheap to make a really sophisticated impact to your customer. And then another option is to just have another monitor hanging next to your advisor's station, or just have a swivel on the one monitor they have so that it can be shared back and forth to the customer. Here's an example of the big screen. And so this is actually a reception that was set up temporarily at a Connie and Dick Scott shop to handle social distancing. And you can see the service advisor got her PPE on, and you're able to still show the information to the customer with a tablet and or a gigantic screen that you're casting the repair order onto, with all the details, all the additional digital content that you've collected. If you don't have a shop management system that does this, you can just get your Google Drive that's access to the internet, have a point and shoot camera with a Wi-Fi SD card, make sure whatever the technicians are capturing is getting sent to that storage device, and then you can pull up the file of all the data that was found, all the photos that you collected, and show that to the customer when they come to pick up the car, just with a great big television that you have hanging in your reception area. I mean, just being able to put this stuff in front of your customer at all is going to make you look fantastic and make a really big difference in not only their willingness to give you money and understand your technical capability, but also they're going to write you great reviews. They're going to write you 5-star reviews raving about the service that you provided. So in conclusion, showcasing your technical expertise is showcasing your value. It's actually the primary component of your value is your technical expertise. You do need to be sensitive about not browbeating your customers or overwhelming them or intimidating them. You need to be thoughtful about making sure that the information that you're providing is pertinent. And it's not a perfect science. Some people want more, some people want less. What you should do is just follow the compass of, is it relevant? Is this relevant to what we did on the car? Great. And then you can decide how much you want to go into detail when the customer picks up. Most importantly, you want to show them how you fixed the car, the fix, the thing that they're paying for. This will make you look more sophisticated, knowledgeable, and organized. It will also reinforce your competence and care. And last but not least, my favorite, it shifts the emphasis off of the car and onto the car and off of the shop. Oftentimes we get killed as the messenger. We're the bad guys. We're not the bad guys. We're the good guys. We're here to help you. And God knows if we wanted to make money, we could go and do a million other things. We do this because we really care about people, we really care about cars. And so being able to help the customer really appreciate that, man, that's really important to just, our self-worth and our stress level. It's so hard having that adversarial relationship with your customer. Always want to avoid it. Oftentimes we're expecting advisors to be, amazing with their emotional, their EQ, and how they can kind of say the customer. Your advisors shouldn't have to do that. Obviously, they need to be personal, but you should just be able to present the details of the car. It's not your problem, it's the customer's problem. They bought the car. Show them the information that's going on, show them that you're trying to help them, and help them make the right decision. The result will be higher tickets for sure, and more 5-star reviews. Overwhelming 5-star reviews. And that is this presentation. Thank you very much for joining. I hope it was interesting. If you want more information, we'll send some links out in a bit, but getshopware.com/WorldPac for more information and demo. And now I'm going to turn it over to Luke for Q&A.
Wow, thanks, Carolyn. That was fantastic and very eye-opening. At the beginning of the presentation, you used the phrase "adapt or die," and while it's certainly easy to look at that right now in the many adaptations that shops and changes that shops are making to deal with the current COVID-19 situation, that the reality is, we need to continue to adapt. And just because the way we're doing it now works and the way we've done it in the past is still working, that doesn't mean that there isn't a better way to do stuff. So with that, we certainly have some questions coming in here. At the beginning of the presentation, when talking about some of the advantages to investing in new technology in the shop, one of your final dot points there was to attract new technicians. Besides the obvious, getting the latest and greatest tools and equipment in the shop, in your opinion, what would be a really good investment in technology that a shop could make that would help attract new technicians?
Yeah, it depends on the technician, of course, because some older techs are very particular about how they want to do things, and you don't want to disturb them as much as possible. You just want them to fix the cars. So I acknowledge that. But for everybody else that's, under the age of 60, they're on Facebook, they have smartphones, and being able to have technology that is fast and easy to use. I really believe in having a dedicated workstation for every single technician, presumably at their toolbox, instead of having tablets. I think having an additional tablet's great if that's how you want to manage your inspections and so forth. Obviously, you can take pictures with tablets, but having a dedicated workstation with a normal size screen, with a full size keyboard, it doesn't cost you that much anymore. You can get a Chrome box and a non-touch monitor and a keyboard and mouse, a corded keyboard and mouse, because you don't need the Bluetooth, you don't need to worry about it. That whole setup is like $300. It's so cheap now. And if somebody pours coffee all over that keyboard, whatever, it costs $15 to replace. And then the technician feels kind of unlocked to be able to see what they need to do on the ticket. They can read what they're being asked to do. They feel less like they're in a box.
Yeah, so that's a wonderful suggestion. And definitely, certainly creates the feeling that you're in a much more modern workplace, definitely. Great suggestion. Moving on now to work orders. We have several questions regarding work orders. I'll try and bunch them into some general topics here. The first one is with regards to diagnostics. Now, obviously, while writing up a work order, general repairs or replacement of broken parts is relatively straightforward when writing it up. But there's a broken part, a leaking part, you take it off, you put a new one on. But with diagnostics, that can oftentimes be its own unique journey because of trying to find what's wrong and can oftentimes be very expensive and time consuming to do. So how do you encourage or maybe incentivize the technician to help with the write-up of that, particularly with long diagnostics? And then how do you help sell that time to the customer to convince them that that time was well spent and the fee is deserved.
Yeah, I mean, you have to control when you loop the customer in. You don't want them to be too deep into kind of like, how is the sausage made? But assuming that you're sequencing kind of the detail from the technician back to the customer, either because you need to sell more time or because you found out what you need to do next and you're ready to make that recommendation. I think, frankly, capturing that information and putting it on the ticket and showing it to the customer does you a great service, even if, you know, there's some occasional misspellings and stuff. I don't think that's necessarily bad. If anything, the customer's hearing it from the horse's mouth, for lack of a better term, in the sense that they're like, okay, there's a real human being who is doing all of this testing on my car, and their results are the recommendations. And that helps you understand, A, that the work was done. If, for example, you have to sell some more time, it's clear to be able to point to say, here's everything we've already done. That's why it took an hour. Now we need some more time. There's been a lot of emphasis on rephrasing diagnosis as testing, because that's what you're actually doing. I'm kind of old-fashioned. I like to use diagnosis. I think it just sounds more sophisticated, but a lot of people would say, no, you should say testing. You should demystify it. And then, you know, you say 1 hour of testing. This is how you write it, right? You can do 1 hour testing and maybe what you're calling out, or maybe you do a level 1 and a level 2. But in terms of how you're capturing what the technician's finding, you know, your technician should be sharing this information, gathering this information as much as possible. And if for whatever reason it's painful for them to type it out on one of those workstations that I just mentioned, talk to text is a great solution. So if they've got a phone, they can open up that spot where they can deliver the detail, and they can just go blah, 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 and it all just goes onto the ticket, or excuse me, goes into whatever that tool is that they're using. You can use Slack, for example, if you want to use an internal messaging tool to just send that information from back of house to front of house. If for whatever reason you're not using like a cloud-based shop management system, there's ways of gathering that in parallel. And then they're not having to necessarily write it all out on the piece of paper. You lose the risk of making errors in transposing it from the written repair order onto the shop management system. And in a lot of ways, the reasons why technicians have been disincentivized from sharing all that details because they had to write it all out. And if it's just like snap, 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 talk to text, or maybe they have to write a couple notes, but a lot of what they found or already seen has been captured in that digital media, it's no extra effort on their part really to have to pull out their phone and take a couple of photos.
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the key takeaways in your answer there really is constant communication between the service advisor and the technician. I find particularly with, you know, technicians that have a lot of experience, you can trust them to just know they're going to get the job done, but then 4 hours later it's like, okay, what did you do? Knowing that the time was well spent, but you know, getting those updates so that the story can be well presented to the customer.
Well, and so this is also gets back to that the technician's job increasingly, you know, if we're going to get to a $250 labor rate, and that technician is going to get to $150K a year, they need to start using this stuff to really showcase what they're doing. What is the value? If you just go back there and bang around a little bit and then come back and say, I figured it out, that's not making you look very sophisticated either as the technician. Plus it covers your butt, right? So you capture all that stuff, it's written down. As I mentioned earlier, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. Document all that stuff. You're doing that work anyway. And even though you know, you're on flat rate, it takes you 5 extra minutes. For example, we take this recording of the cooling system. It takes, you know, an extra 5 minutes to pull out the text stream, hook it up, get the PIDs, do the recording. But as long as you're getting compensated for that extra 5 minutes, as long as that's billed hours, I mean, that's critical, not only for what you're being paid today, but what you're going to get paid tomorrow, what you're going to go back to your manager and say, hey, you know, I've really stepped up my game, I need a raise. So you can incentivize the technician doing it.
Yeah. When diagnosing a vehicle and it has a substantial amount of fault codes in there, which is becoming more and more common on modern vehicles, do you encourage including all of those fault codes in the work order, or just simply attaching a printout of the vehicle scan, or a combination of both?
Yeah. I think it's easy to overwhelm, and the customer is ultimately asking you to fix the car. We're not asking them to fix the car. So understanding what's too much. On the flip side, if you're not going to write it all down in the ticket, you absolutely have to have that report. You have to have that health check. If you do a pre and post scan, like that's solid gold. If and when that customer comes back with the light on, God forbid, or there's a dispute, having that information, knowing where you were and where you got to is just like, and you're kicking yourself when you don't do it too. When you knew that you had it, but you just didn't include it. Why didn't we just include it? We ran the health check anyway. Just take a summary, print it onto a PDF and attach it to the ticket. And if the customer wants to look at it, fine. If they don't want to look at it, fine, but at least it's there.
Yeah. All right, that's a great idea. What are your thoughts with regards to charging a resource fee when it's necessary to access data, whether it's an all data or a Mitchell description or MotoLogic, and then obviously, individual subscriptions to manufacturers? Do you find it's better to just include that in your general labor rate, or when dealing with specific problems on cars to actually put a line item in the invoice for information access?
That's a good question. I've done it different ways at my shop. I think that, if you're asking the customer to pay something a lot, like, access to get a security code to code a key or reprogram an ECU or something like that, you're asking them to pay for it, right? It's not just an extra hour of labor, what have you. I think it's really important to call that out. And then you have an opportunity to document whatever you got from that service as appropriate to show them, hey, this is what this thing did. This was us calibrating this key or whatever. So if they can understand what it is, for most people these days, they're buying on Amazon, right? They're buying through digital means all the time. And so when they can see that detail that you may be buying, for example, as part of that ticket, I think they can understand that's part of kind of their cart of what they're getting as the service. So I don't worry about too many, nickel and diming concerns. Where it gets sticky is where you're not being honest about your cost of goods on a general basis. I think that if you're going to have stuff that you're charging for, like for example, on every ticket or every other ticket, just include it in your labor rate. It kind of depends on where the value is. It probably also depends on how much other stuff you're talking about, because you want to save what you're sharing with the customer to be the stuff that's the most important. And if some of this other stuff really isn't adding a lot of value and it's just more distracting to the customer, then you can roll it up. But I don't think it's problematic, especially when it's a special like diagnostic thing. I think that's actually better, because it shows them that that's what you used. You used a factory tool, you use a factory, SDRM licensing component. I mean, that stuff is really, really hard to maintain, and then they get to actually see it and appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Along the same lines, if a customer has an aftermarket warranty, and obviously that is consuming a tremendous amount of time for the service advisor to deal with it, do you recommend charging a fee for the time spent with the warranty company?
Yeah, I hate those warranty companies. Yeah, maybe there's some, like, if you're going to use an aftermarket warranty company, that's fine, and we're happy to help you broker that reimbursement to the extent, but we're time boxing it at 30 minutes of advisor's time, and that is equivalent to X dollars. So I'm going to put this on this ticket, and I'm putting that in front of you in advance. If you prefer to manage this yourself, you can just pay the bill and then go back and talk to the warranty company, and that's fine. You don't have to pay for it. But yeah, I think especially when you know what you're going to get into, it's going to be at least a half an hour or something. And then, you probably don't feel quite so bad. At least you got paid for it. Like, for example, there's a lot of people who have a hard and fast policy that the customer can't bring their own parts. And that's because you make money on parts, okay? Some people say, well, It could be cheap, it could be a comeback, it could be this, it could be that. I mean, you can get around that like you do get around all of the issues that you might have as defects. But generally speaking, if someone buys a part that's new, it's probably going to be a lot like the part that you bought. And why, why like discourage them from using your business? The difference is that you just look at how much gross profit you make on your parts, and usually it's around $50, and then you just add that to your labor rate. So instead of getting the GP through your dollars, you're getting your GP through your labor, and you say, we're happy to do whatever you want with your own parts, but our labor rate for when you bring your own parts is X number of dollars additional over our standard rate. If you want us to put the parts on with our own parts, then we'll charge you the reduced labor rate.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move away from some of those difficult questions and get back into maybe something a little bit more fun. When you were talking about emphasizing digital content before, during, and after, you highlighted taking photos during the repair, showing things completely disassembled, which I think is a fantastic way to show the customer exactly how much work was involved and why the repair cost so much. Do you have any fears of that backfiring when a customer sees the picture of their car completely disassembled and then is always wondering if that rattle they're hearing is because it wasn't put back together again right, and almost making the ever since argument worse when the customer sees how much work was done?
Yeah, the flip side is we didn't put your car up in the air, and so this thing that I found the next time you came back that's under the car, I couldn't have possibly have looked at because we didn't do that. It kind of cuts both ways. On the flip side, they're gonna suspect you of doing whatever it is always, and I would say, even though it's not directly related, the fact that you were so transparent about the repairs the first time around means that when they come back again and you're transparent about whatever you find again, they can understand, okay, this is science, not religion. I see that, this clip was broken, and this clip was broken not by you. So the more you can convey that, I mean, I've had situations where, you find the drain plug is stripped, you take a picture of the stripped drain plug, you take a picture of the oil change sticker in the window, and you show it to the customer, and you're like, I'm sorry, but this is what we found. Then the information is, what they're upset about is the drain plug. What they're upset about is the sticker in the window, not you necessarily. And so the more you can show the information and put it in front of them, I think you're actually better off. I think there's always the case, and you can't make kind of broad strokes. There's always nuance because of what we do, and there are certain things that are probably you don't need to share. And so you may learn over time, what, this is creating too many additional questions. Maybe we don't need to go this deep. Certainly, to the extent you're not disrespecting the customers, and if anything, they're saying, wow, the panels are being treated properly and they're clean and put back together. I mean, that might actually add value.
Yeah, wonderful. That's I think the pros outweigh the cons in taking all of those photos. And then along the lines of all those photos you took, you showed some examples of sharing that information with the customer, whether it was on a large TV screen or a swivel monitor. If the customer then requests to have all of that stuff for their own personal record, what do you think is the best method of distribution? Is it just simply email or Google Drive share, or possibly a small thumb drive? What would be your suggestion?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if you're using Shop-Ware, it would just be on the repair order. So the repair order itself is like the storage, and then they can access it through a link. If you're not using that and you want to provide the information, you can do so probably email. On the other hand, it's possible you could get like a branded thumb drive or something with your shop name. That might be cool, and they can reuse it. Certainly, giving them access to the information is really, really handy. Not only because you're adding value at the time they pick up the car, but if they want to go back and refer to something, feeling like they're empowered to do that and they don't have to kind of try and come back through you to get that data is really important. There's always that okay, are they going to price shop me? Are they going to, whatever is going to happen? I want to be more closed about what we did when the car was in the shop. If you're doing your job and you're, an ethical business, and you show the customer what you did, and then they decide to go and share that with somebody else, even in hindsight, to get a second opinion, that other professional is going to see all that detail. And that also, not only are you talking about customers, winning appeal with other customers or with their family members or whatever, you're going to have, a positive response from other potential shops as well. And so that helps that other shop speak up on your behalf. So the goodwill is very powerful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so some potential marketing opportunities in there also.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how long is a typical showcase vehicle delivery?
Good question. I think when, if we're doing like in person, you're saying like pickup, I assume, like checkout. Presumably the customer has seen a lot of that information already up until the approval of the additional work, and then you're reviewing whatever is the final. It's possible that you can share the job with the customer and they can view all of that and then pay for the service before they even come to get the car. So all they're doing when they come to pick up the car is, hey, I see that you paid. Do you have any additional questions? Oh, you don't? Here are your keys. And that's also, if you're using a Dropbox or other kinds of management for contact lists, that's a way to facilitate that. If you're doing it in person, like some of the examples that I showed, I think on average it's like 5 minutes. So you try to keep it sub 5 minutes. Sometimes, customers want to talk to you, and that's the ideal use of an advisor's time, right? If someone actually wants to have that human interaction with your shop, not having to answer the phone and being able to give that customer your full attention really endears you to them, and they feel like they've been heard even after the job is complete. So 5 minutes, but more if you need to.
Yeah. Okay, and then our final question before we close it out for the night. What are some things that you should absolutely not mention in the customer's copy of a work order?
Yeah, I've seen some really remarkable commentary about the customer and their cleanliness with other example repair orders. And I think that, obviously you don't want to call it the customer as being a slob. Typically notes about whether they're deadbeats and they don't pay their bill is one component. Anything that's sort of back of house, individual customer detail, I think should not be included. On the other hand, the goal is to not put any back of house notes. This is where the technician notes can be kind of tricky, because technicians may be saying, this guy's a pig, and that's the reason why, X, Y, and Z is wrong with their HVAC system. And then you're going to have to take the time to make sure you massage that before you put it in front of the customer. But at least if the technicians put it down, you can either hide it or you can edit it, and there is no replacement. I know a lot of people think that going digital means that you're going to have no service advisor at all. The goal is to maximize the time of the service advisor, right? And the service advisor knowing what's appropriate to share and not share is their primary role.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Carolyn. You've provided a wealth of information and food for thought. I think a lot of shops now are going to be absorbing this and trying to decide as we slowly begin to open up some economies and see things return to normal. What is our future shop? What do our future procedures look like? And it's a great time for change. And you've certainly provided some wonderful insight on things and ways that we can be doing just our regular procedures in the shop, but better, more efficient, and to highlight the technology to both customers and potential employees. So I thank you very much for your time and to our audience here. If you have any additional questions, please email us at WTI@worldpac.com and include the class code there, OLT42, in the subject line. For those of you that have not joined us already on Facebook and use Facebook, please come find us at CTI plus WTI members. That's a great opportunity for you to engage with like-minded individuals that have a desire to learn and further their knowledge base, but also to connect and engage with the instructors themselves. Many of our instructors are also in that group, and it's a wonderful place to continue the conversation. Please continue joining us this week. Tomorrow we have a Volkswagen Audi class on the variable valve timing system. We have another management class on Thursday, the top 5 selling strategies in a declining market. And then we will be closing out the week with some electrical diagnostics and some quick tests on Friday before your long Memorial Day weekend. So again, a huge thank you to Carolyn and her team there at Shop-Ware and Luscious Garage. And a shout out to Scott Brown for introducing us tonight. And I just wish you all a wonderful night and get some rest, because tomorrow's another day. So thank you all and have a good night.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.